Snow fell softly outside the Callaway Grand Hotel, turning the city into a glittering postcard. Inside, crystal chandeliers shimmered above silk-draped tables. Champagne flowed freely, and 100 polished smiles reflected wealth, power, and celebration. It was the annual Harrington Industries Christmas Gala, the most exclusive event of the year. And tonight, Elena Harrington stood at its center, trembling. She wore a simple ivory dress, elegant but modest compared to the diamond-studded gowns surrounding her. Her hands were cold, though the ballroom was warm, not from the winter, but from fear, from humiliation, from heartbreak. She hadn't known this night would end her marriage. Just hours earlier, Elena had believed she was coming to support her husband, Julian Harrington, the charming executive vice president of Harrington Industries. For years, she had played the role of the quiet, graceful wife, the woman who stood one step behind him, smiling softly, never demanding attention. She never wanted the spotlight, but Julian did. He stood on the stage now, tall and confident in a tailored black tuxedo, raising his champagne glass as applause filled the room. The board members adored him, investors respected him, socialites whispered his name like it carried magic. Elena watched from the edge of the crowd, her heart aching with pride and something darker she couldn't quite name. Julian's eyes scanned the audience and passed right over her. "Tonight," Julian announced, his voice smooth and practiced, "we celebrate another record-breaking year for Harrington Industries." Cheers erupted. "And," he continued, smiling wider, "we celebrate new beginnings." Elena frowned. New beginnings? Suddenly, a woman stepped onto the stage beside him, tall, radiant, dressed in red that clung perfectly to her figure. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She recognized her. Vanessa Monroe, Julian's assistant, the woman he'd sworn was just a colleague, the woman whose late-night emails he always hid, the woman Elena had tried desperately to trust him about. Julian placed his hand on Vanessa's waist. The room buzzed with excitement. "Many of you already know," Julian said lightly, "that my marriage has been evolving." Elena felt like the floor shifted beneath her feet. "What is he doing?" someone whispered nearby. Julian continued, unfazed. "After much thought, I've decided it's time to be honest, with everyone." Vanessa leaned into him, smiling. "I'm filing for divorce," Julian announced, "and I'm proud to introduce the woman I plan to build my future with." The applause was hesitant at first, then louder. Elena couldn't hear it anymore. Her ears rang as if the world had cracked open. This wasn't a private conversation. This wasn't a respectful ending. This was a public execution, and she was the sacrifice. Someone shoved papers into her hands. She looked down. Divorce documents. Her name already printed neatly on the bottom. "Julian wants this signed tonight," a lawyer whispered coldly. "It's best not to make a scene." Not make a scene? At a Christmas party where her husband announced his affair like a toast? Elena's vision blurred. Tears spilled down her cheeks, dotting the white paper. Her fingers shook so badly she nearly dropped the pen. The music resumed. Laughter returned. People pretended nothing tragic was happening a few feet away. Vanessa glanced toward Elena, her lips curving into a faint, victorious smile. Julian didn't look at her at all. Memories flooded Elena's mind. The tiny apartment where they started with nothing. Julian promising, "When I make it, we make it together." The nights Elena skipped meals so he could afford business courses. The years she supported him while he climbed the corporate ladder of her own family's company, a truth he never knew. Because Elena Harrington wasn't just a wife. She was the true Harrington, the heir, the billionaire behind the empire. She had hidden her identity when she married Julian, wanting love, not money, to define their relationship. She never told him her grandfather founded Harrington Industries, never told him she owned the majority shares. She wanted a simple life. She wanted him to love her. Instead, he loved power. The pen hovered over the paper. Her chest felt like it would split open. A tear dropped on the signature line. She signed. The moment her name touched the page, something inside her shattered, and something else hardened. Julian finally looked at her then, not with regret, not with sadness, with relief. "Thank you," he said quietly, taking the papers. "This is for the best." Elena nodded numbly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "For you," she whispered. She turned away before he could respond, before the room could see her collapse. As she walked out of the ballroom, the Christmas tree lights blurred into streaks of gold. The carols felt cruel, joyful, mocking. Outside, snow kissed her cheeks like gentle apologies. She stopped beneath the glowing hotel sign, finally allowing herself to cry. They thought she was nothing now, a discarded wife, a woman replaced. They had no idea. Inside the ballroom, Julian raised another toast, already celebrating his freedom. He didn't know that with Elena's signature, he hadn't just ended a marriage, he had signed his own downfall. And when the truth came out, Christmas would never feel the same again. Elena didn't go home that night. She sat in the back seat of a black town car, watching snowflakes melt against the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Her phone buzzed endlessly, messages from society wives pretending concern, journalists sniffing for scandal, and even Julian's mother, whose last message simply read, "You embarrassed our family tonight." Elena didn't reply. Instead, she stared at her reflection in the glass, the same soft eyes, the same quiet face people had always underestimated. But beneath the tears, something had changed. She was done being invisible. The car stopped before a private elevator entrance, one that hadn't been used in years. The driver stepped out, opened the door, and bowed his head slightly. "Welcome home, Miss Harrington," he said gently. Not Mrs. Harrington, Miss. The doors closed behind her as the elevator ascended silently. When it opened, Elena stepped into a vast penthouse overlooking the city, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, priceless art lining the walls. This was the life she had walked away from once, for love. She kicked off her heels and sank onto the leather sofa, finally letting the weight of everything crash over her. Her chest shook with silent sobs as memories surfaced, memories she'd buried for years. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "Power reveals character, Elena. Hide your name if you must, but never forget who you are." She hadn't forgotten. She just hoped she'd never need to remember. Her phone rang again. This time she answered. "Yes?" Her voice was calm, controlled, unrecognizable from the woman crying on the hotel steps hours earlier. "Miss Harrington?" said a familiar voice. "The board has been notified. They're requesting an emergency meeting." Elena closed her eyes. They saw the gala footage. Julian's announcement caused concern. Concern? She almost laughed. "I'll attend," Elena said. "Tomorrow morning." "Understood. And Miss Harrington?" The voice hesitated. "Are you all right?" Elena looked around the penthouse, at the life she'd abandoned, the power she'd locked away. "No," she said softly, "but I will be." The next morning, Julian woke up feeling victorious. Sunlight spilled across the silk sheets of the luxury suite he now shared with Vanessa. She was still asleep, curled against him, her hair spread across his chest like a trophy. He smiled. Freedom tasted sweet. The divorce had gone smoother than expected. No arguments, no mess. Elena had signed quietly, like she always did, graceful, compliant, forgettable. He rose from bed, already planning the next chapter of his life. The company was thriving, the board respected him, and with Elena gone, nothing held him back. Except his phone buzzed. A message from the board secretary. "Emergency. Mandatory attendance. 10 a.m. Julian frowned. "Emergency?" He glanced at Vanessa. She stirred awake, smiling lazily. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Julian said, though unease crept into his chest. "Just business." The Harrington Industries boardroom was silent when Julian arrived. Too silent. The usual chatter, the familiar nods of approval, none of it greeted him today. Instead, the board members sat stiffly, eyes forward, expressions unreadable. At the head of the table, one chair remained empty.
Julian straightened his tie and took his seat, offering a confident smile. "Good morning," he said. "I assume this is about last night's announcement. I assure you—" The doors opened. Every head turned. Julian froze. Elena walked in. Not in her modest dresses, not in soft pastels meant to fade into the background. She wore black, tailored, powerful, commanding. Her hair was pulled back elegantly, her posture unshaken. She looked untouchable. The room rose to its feet. "Miss Harrington," several voices said at once. Julian's blood ran cold. "Miss?" Elena didn't look at him as she took her place at the head of the table. Her place. She rested her hands calmly on the polished wood and surveyed the room with quiet authority. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." Her voice was steady, controlled, unemotional. Julian's mind raced. What was she doing here? This was a board meeting, not a support group for discarded wives. "Elena," Julian began, forcing a chuckle, "I didn't realize you'd be attending. This meeting concerns—" "Harrington Industries," Elena interrupted, finally turning her gaze toward him. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since their wedding day, Julian felt small. "It concerns my company." The room went deadly still. Julian laughed, too loud, too forced. "Your company?" Elena slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, share certificates, legal filings. The truth. "I am the majority shareholder of Harrington Industries, by inheritance." Someone cleared their throat. "Miss Harrington has controlled 62% of company shares since her grandfather's passing. She chose to remain silent until now." Julian's face drained of color. "No, that's not possible." Elena studied him, her expression unreadable. "You never asked," she said quietly. The room buzzed with murmurs. Julian's hands shook. "This is some kind of joke. Elena, you lived in a tiny apartment. You refused gifts. I wanted a husband, not a gold digger." The words cut deeper than any shout ever could. Vanessa's name echoed in Julian's head. The gala, the applause, the divorce papers signed in tears. Reality crashed down around him. "You built your careers here on my silence," Elena continued, "on sacrifices you never noticed, on nights I stayed home while you networked, believing we were equals." She paused. "Last night, you chose spectacle over dignity, power over loyalty." Julian stood abruptly. "You humiliated me. You hid this from me." Elena's gaze hardened. "I hid nothing you didn't ignore." The chairman cleared his throat again. "Given recent events, the board has concerns regarding Mr. Harrington's judgment and conduct." Julian's breath came fast. "You can't do this. I'm the face of this company." Elena leaned forward slightly. "You were." Silence. Cold. Final. Julian felt the ground slip beneath him as he realized the truth. The woman he'd discarded at a Christmas party wasn't weak. She was patient, and now she was awake.
Julian didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his penthouse office, the city glowing beneath him like a kingdom that no longer belonged to him. The events of the day replayed on a ruthless loop. Elena walking into the boardroom, the way everyone stood for her, the quiet authority in her voice as his world collapsed. He poured himself another drink, hands shaking. "How did I not know?" he muttered, because he never wanted to. He had loved the version of Elena that made him feel powerful, the quiet wife, the supportive shadow, the woman who never challenged him. The moment she stopped serving his ego, he had replaced her, and now she had replaced him. Across the city, Elena stood before the window of her penthouse, watching snow fall over the streets below. Christmas Eve had arrived, and with it a strange stillness. She should have felt victorious. Instead, her chest ached. The board had voted unanimously that afternoon. Julian was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation for ethical violations, nepotism, misuse of influence, and reputational damage to the company. Vanessa had resigned by sunset.
her red dress already forgotten by the same socialites who once applauded her. The news spread fast. Headlines flooded the internet. CEO in waiting removed after shocking Christmas gala scandal. The wife he discarded was the billionaire all along. Elena closed her eyes. This wasn't the triumph she had imagined in her darkest moments. It was justice, but justice came with ghosts. Her phone rang. Julian. She let it ring. Again. And again. Finally, she answered. Elena, his voice cracked. Please, just listen. She said nothing. I didn't know, he continued desperately. If I had known who you were, that's the problem. You only value what has a price tag. Silence stretched between them. I loved you, Julian whispered. Elena's throat tightened. You loved what I made you feel. Important, admired, untouchable. That's not true. Then why did you destroy me in public? She asked. Julian had no answer. The memory burned in both of them, her tears falling onto the divorce papers, the laughter and music swallowing her pain, the Christmas tree glittering behind him as he chose someone else. I was afraid, Julian finally said. Afraid you were holding me back. Elena laughed softly, not with humor, but with sorrow. I was holding you up, she said. The call ended. Julian stared at his phone long after the line went dead, finally understanding the weight of what he had lost. Not wealth, not status, but the only person who had ever loved him without conditions. On Christmas morning, the Harrington family estate buzzed with controlled chaos. Staff moved quietly, decorators adjusted final details, and the massive tree in the grand hall shimmered with white and gold lights. For the first time in years, Elena hosted Christmas. She descended the staircase in a simple emerald dress, elegant but unassuming. The same staff who had known her as a child greeted her warmly, their eyes filled with relief. She's home, their expressions said. Guests arrived cautiously. Board members, charity partners, longtime family allies. They whispered about the scandal, about Julian's fall, about Elena's return to power. But Elena didn't address it. Instead, she stood at the center of the hall and raised her glass. Thank you for being here, she said. This year has reminded me of something important. The room quieted. That power reveals character, and pain reveals truth. She announced a surprise initiative, millions redirected towards employee support funds, scholarships, and domestic abuse charities. Programs she'd once championed quietly, now expanded boldly. The applause was genuine, respectful, earned. As the guests mingled, a butler approached her hesitantly. Miss Harrington? Mr. Julian Harrington is at the gate. He's asking to see you. Elena's heart skipped. She had expected this. Let him in, she said after a moment. Julian walked into the grand hall looking like a stranger. His suit was still expensive, but it no longer wore him. His shoulders were slumped, his confidence stripped away. People turned away politely, pretending not to see him. Elena met him near the Christmas tree. For a long moment, neither spoke. I don't expect forgiveness, Julian said quietly. I just couldn't let Christmas pass without saying I'm sorry. Elena studied him, really studied him, for the first time in years. He looked smaller, human. I believed love meant making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I was wrong. Julian swallowed. I lost everything. No, Elena corrected gently. You lost what you didn't value. Tears filled his eyes. I loved you the wrong way, he said. That doesn't make it love, Elena replied. She reached into her clutch and handed him an envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a settlement agreement, fair, dignified, generous enough to let him start over without destroying him. Julian looked up in shock. Why would you do this? Elena glanced at the glowing tree, the lights reflecting softly in her eyes. Because I refuse to become bitter, and because the woman who cried while signing those papers deserved peace, not revenge. Julian's voice broke. I don't deserve this. Maybe not, but I deserve to move on. She turned away. This time, she didn't look back. Julian left quietly, the sound of the gates closing behind him echoing like the end of a chapter he could never rewrite. As midnight approached, Elena stood alone by the window, watching snow fall once more. The city looked softer tonight, kinder. Her phone buzzed, messages of support, gratitude, admiration. She smiled faintly. She hadn't won by destroying him, she had won by reclaiming herself. At the stroke of midnight, church bells rang across the city. Elena whispered a promise to her reflection in the glass. Never again. Outside, Christmas lights glowed brighter, and for the first time in years, Elena Harrington felt something she thought she'd lost forever: peace.